Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing the Sharks weekly recap, this time week 8. The Sharks started this week with their second game of their big 5-game road trip after coming off of a big loss to the Golden Knights 6-0 to start it off. They were hoping for a much better result and much better results from the next 4 games, which were all against Eastern Conference teams. They started off in the first one on Tuesday, the Sharks versus the Sabres. The Sabres were on a 9-game winning streak at this point, looking to get their 10th in a row, a historic 10-game winning streak that they would be on. They came out pretty decently. The Sharks fell behind a couple of goals, but in the third period, it was Joe Pavelski who played hero, managed to get 2 goals in that third period, bringing the game to overtime. However, the Sharks ended up falling due to Jeff Skinner getting his 19th of the season and giving the Sabres their 10th win in a row, while the Sharks dropped the second one on their road trip. They then had to fly to Toronto and play them just the following night. The Toronto Maple Leafs beat them earlier this season by a score of 5-3, and we saw once again with Dell and Nets this time that the Sharks still fell to the Maple Leafs 5-3. It was mostly because of the Maple Leafs' strong power play in this game. Austin Matthews returned from injury for that game, and as such, he managed to score a power play goal, also add He scored a power play goal, added another goal to that with an assist. 3-point night for him. The Maple Leafs scored 3 power play goals. The Sharks only had 2, and the Maple Leafs cruised to a 5-3 victory. The Sharks then headed over to the nation's capital against the Ottawa Senators, probably the team that they would face that is the weakest on this road trip, and the Sharks ended up losing pretty badly to the Ottawa Senators. They started in the first period and it was relatively even, not much going on. Score ended 0-0, but it was the second period where the Senators exploded, ended up taking a 3-1 lead into the third period. The third period would not go any different. The Senators would score 3 goals again, and it would end up being a 6-2 victory for the Ottawa Senators. Finally, the Sharks would come the next night once more, trying to get at least a single win on the road trip as they now sat 0-3-1. They faced off against the Montreal Canadiens, and while the Canadiens poured a lot of shots onto the San Jose Sharks and the defense still looked pretty shaky, it was Martin Jones who played hero for the San Jose Sharks, and they capped off this week with a 3-1 victory thanks to a power play goal from Brent Burns as the game winner. Moving on to the stats of the week, Joe Pavelski led the way as he has been doing for the past couple of weeks normally. He gets 4 goals, 2 assists, which brings his point total up to 23 points. Of course, his goal total now at 17, which leads the team. Brent Burns continues to have a very solid season for himself offensively, gets 1 goal, 4 assists, puts his point total up to 29 with a 5-point week in 4 games. Logan Couture gets 4 assists in each of the 4 games. Well, he got 2 assists in one and 0 assists in one of the others, but his 4 assists ends up getting him up to 26 points on the season. And then Kevin Labanc, the only other player with more than a single point this week, put up 2 assists to get himself up to 17. And then there were about 11 players who had only a single point. There were only a few players who actually failed to register a point, but this goes to show, the Sharks had maybe a bit of a balanced offense, but they also didn't really get to score much at even strength this week. A lot of their goals came on the power play. They were outscored rather heavily at even strength during these 4 games, and so it's definitely an issue the Sharks will have to address as they move on. News of the week, as I said, the power play remains to be quite hot. You look at the game against the Sabres, Sharks scored a power play goal. Against the Maple Leafs, they got 2. Against the Senators, they got 1. And against the Canadiens, they got 1, which is 5 power play goals in 4 games. The power play, which some have criticized over this season thus far, is now looking to have rebounded a bit, recovered a bit, and they are now coming close to the top 10 in the league. Next, Karlsson returned to Ottawa. He played his first game against the Ottawa Senators in Ottawa, and it was a bit of an emotional return for him. He got a tribute in the first period, I believe the first TV timeout that didn't end up going to commercial of the first period. It was a nice little tribute. It's going to be interesting to see what goes on in the off-season. Karlsson has made it known that he really loved the Ottawa Senators and he really would have liked to stay, but he ended up getting traded. It'll be interesting to see if something changes with Ottawa ownership, if Karlsson is willing to go back, or if the Sharks will actually be able to retain him. It'll be quite a big loss for the Sharks after making such a massive trade for a player like Erik Karlsson to not be able to re-sign him by the end of this season, but I don't want to get too ahead of myself. Final note, Timo Meier remained out. He played the game against the Buffalo Sabres, but he did not play in the final 3 games of this week. He did skate at some point, and so The Sharks are certainly hopeful that he'll return for Wednesday. It'll be interesting to see what the lines do play out to be, but Timo Meier is a very big part of this team right now, certainly one of the maybe 3 or 4 forwards at this point who are actually playing at the level that they are expected to be at. Meier maybe even surpassing that, and so the Sharks would really need him to return. He's been a great goal scorer for them, and he'll definitely help the even strength scoring that certainly suffered this week. Class dismissed.